a science fiction novel, and a story behind writing science fiction based on today's tech trends. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is Brett Frischmann, author and Charles Widger Endowed University professor in law, business, and economics at Villanova University. Welcome, Brett.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody.
Give us a brief summary of your professional background that includes degrees in astrophysics, earth and resource engineering, and law.
Yeah, so after going to school, I worked in DC for Wilmer Cutler and Pickering, and then I clerked for the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and then I've been in academia since then at Loyola University of Chicago, Cardozo Law School in New York, and most recently at Villanova University.
Certainly a lot of background. You're also an author. I mentioned that in the introduction. In fact, your latest book, Shepherd's Drone, is a science fiction novel set 130 years into the future. What's the premise of the story?
Yes, it is. It's interesting to hear you say it's set 100. It reminds me how far in the future it's set. It's a sort of near future novel. As you said, it's trying to. It's a novel. The premise of the novel is that we're in you're sort of in a world in which societies use different technology to sort of mold themselves, to mold humanity, to sort of fit different conceptions of what an ideal human might be. And this is sort of what the people refer to as modification. And so there's biomods, biologically modified humans, comp mods, sort of computer, AI, networked modified humans. And then there's unmodified humans. And so there's sort of on the East Coast, you've got biomods that sort of perfect their humans through genetic engineering, manipulating genetic code, and then also throughout life with personalized pharmaceuticals. And then on the West Coast, you've got the comp mods who rely instead on sort of an optimization algorithm that all of the comp mods are sort of tethered to invisible data networks, and they're sort of relying on a different set of technologies to sort of modify how they behave and interact in the world. And then the unmodifieds that are sort of hiding in the Midwest have tried to avoid both societies, the biomods and the comp mods. So that's the sort of the setting or the environment for the novel, the context for the novel. And the novel itself, the real focus, it's a sci-fi novel, but in some ways, a number of people have suggested I also sort of describe it as a sort of a women's fiction novel, because the main character is Kate Gannett, is a biomod geneticist who sort of evolves in a variety of different ways throughout the course of the book. But she starts out sort of in a hospital setting, and is sort of in a very sort of stable sort of way of living, and sort of very comfortable with who she is. But she witnesses the sudden death of an infant in a hospital and knows something has gone wrong, despite all of the evidence to the contrary, suggesting that things are fine. And so that leads to sort of this tug of war between the rational and emotional parts of her mind that sort of becomes disorienting and liberating in different ways, and that sort of sets her on a path to sort of figure out what happened. So it's one of those. It's also so it's a science fiction novel with this sort of quest or adventure sort of component to it. That's probably
Yeah.
much longer than you were. That's
Well,
a long
let's
long
talk about the
setup.
mods.
Huh?
You mentioned comp mods and biomods, and I didn't realize this is fiction, but do you think we're really headed that way in real life?
Yes. I mean, to some degree we already do sort of rely on different technologies to modify who we are and how we behave. I mean, there's a whole So in the Reengineering Humanity book, the sort of nonfiction book I wrote, which I sort of wrote in parallel with this novel, um, we have a whole chapter, for example, on this idea of the extended mind, how we today extend who we are as human beings and how we think through the technologies we use, through our smartphones, through our social networking technologies. And in some ways, we extend our minds that way, but we also invite others into our minds. And so a um, uh, lot of the discussion of technology, both biomod and compmod technology in Shepard's drone, um, I did my best, I guess, to sort of make it sort of realistic, plausible extensions of currently existing technologies. So they're not necessarily super long steps away from where we are today.
Why in your story was it necessary to engineer harmony?
So the idea of engineered harmony, so one way to think about that is certainly within the various communities, there's a certain degree of harmony, right? So the biomods are a seemingly harmonious community. They seem to live well, they seem to be happy. The comp mods similarly um, live harmonious lives and seem to be happy with their existence. And to some degree, though less is known, certainly in the beginning of the book, although Kate ends up, this isn't giving too much away, but Kate ends up in unmodified communities, spending time in the Midwest, and they seem to live harmoniously, although there are the seeming harmony that exists in the different communities doesn't mean that there's no tension between them, and that certainly surfaces. And there's certainly a certain degree of tension between there's sort of an us-them, even though there's no us-them based on race or no apparent us-them based on, say, gender. And a lot of the us-them dynamics that we see in modern society today, some of those things seem to have been engineered away or seem to have sort of faded in some sense by the time you get to the novel's setting. But there's certainly an us-them, it's been replaced. Like that us-them dynamic hasn't gone away. The biomods view themselves a certain way, and they view comp mods as degenerate in other ways. And similarly, the comp mods view biomods as degenerate in other ways. So there's certainly tension and lack of harmony amongst the communities.
You mentioned this is your first novel, and we've also, you and I personally talked about Andrew Ware. He was early on a guest on our show before he, went famous with
I'm
The
following in his
Martian.
footsteps to the best I can.
So he's told his story about how he was a self-published author. How did you go about learning the sci-fi craft and becoming a published author?
Wow. I mean, I so the origin story for this novel is kind of funny. So like back in I don't know 2010, um, I had sort of was at a bar with my friend Devin Desai, who's a professor at Georgia Tech, and he had asked me to read a short story that he had written, sort of sci-fi short story. It was really good, and I was giving him feedback, comments on it, and it was sort of fun. And then at the end of near the end of the evening, I said to him, I said, here's a story you should write, and I had just read for the Reengineering Humanity book, that I was starting to work on. I had just read a book about extended mind, the philosophy of extended mind, and I'd also been reading some bioethics, a book about bioethics. And I was like, what would a world, where people had to choose between being biologically modified, genetically engineered, or being, modified, extending their mind through technology. What if you had to choose between the two? And so I said to Devin, I just read these books and I've been thinking about it. I said, Devin, here's the novel you ought to write. And I started describing this, like the biomod, the comp mod split society, and some of the idea of that you see in the first chapter of Shepard's drone. And so I laid it out for him a bit. And after he, patiently listened, he's like, yeah, that's interesting. And he says to me, he said, well, you should write. And I said, Devin, you should write this. He says, no, dude, dude, write your own book. Like, I'm not gonna write your book. You write your own book. And then I was like, I started laughing. I said, there's no way. I don't know how to write fiction. Like, how the heck would I write a novel? I don't know. Done no training in that. I mean, all my stuff has been physics and math all my life. I don't have no idea how to. And then like law. I mean, I have no idea how to do fiction. He said, we'll figure it out. Like, you can learn it. Like, just start trying, start writing some things. Like, and and then he said he recommended Stephen King's book on writing. I got Orson Scott Card's book on writing, science fiction and fantasy. And then I actually got one of those dummies guide, like the dummies guide to writing fiction. It was awesome. I mean, it actually was really helpful just in helping me like identify like the aspects of writing a novel that I had no idea where to start or what to do. And then I started reading things online about how from writers about how to write. And so then I just basically for a few years in a row, every 7 days a week, every day, I got up, I set my alarm, I got up at 5 in the morning, and had coffee and wrote for 2 hours, no matter what. Like, no matter what happened, I'd stare at the screen if I had to. Some days nothing would happen. Other days it would go real well. Other days I'd be writing and then I'd look up, I'd like, oh crap, I got to get to class, or like, because 4 hours had gone by and I was totally like completely in the story. I was at one of those years I was commuting to Duke to teach for a semester at Duke, and I was like, I would still stuck to it every morning at 5, even when I was doing that commute. I'd do it in the airport, and I don't know, it just sort of happened. In some ways the novel wrote itself. Like, there's certain parts of the novel that just kind of certain stories, certain characters that I hadn't really plotted out and thought about until I was in the middle of writing, and they just kind of like some of the ideas just kind of happened. I had it probably was like 2 dozen different drafts, like major revisions, rewrites. Probably had at least 15 to 20 different people who read the whole thing and like commented. I hired at the advice of Sue Shapiro, is another person I got a lot of advice from. She's a fiction and a writing instructor in New York. And she had said, like, hire copy editors, like, a couple $100 here, a couple hundred, it'll just help dramatically. And so I worked with a bunch of different copy editors. It was a long, hard process to get the novel where I felt it needed to be. And then I spent a few years trying to get an agent and playing that game, which just seems like a game. I never ever got a bite from anybody. Lots of people said, "Oh, send me the manuscript," and said, "Oh, this is really good," but I don't really do that kind of stuff. And so I did a lot of research into what it took to self-publish. Hesitated for a long time. Sort of sat on it and hesitated and worried, and then finally was like, you know what? Just get it out there and see what happens. And so there, and I worked. I was on. I think I mentioned this to you and we're off for the interview. I hopped on. I mean, I'm actually been a member of Facebook for a while. I'm on Facebook in part because I teach internet law, and I feel like I need to know how the thing works so that I can actually talk about it in class. But also one of the benefits of Facebook are some of the closed groups or the public groups that are on there. And I'm on a fiction writing group, and there's a lot of complete strangers who've helped me significantly grow as a writer and figure out how to, uh, different strategies for writing, or have helped me connect with format designers and like how to think about doing self-publishing. And like my person who helped design the whole cover was someone I found through that group. So that was very useful. And so I think a lot of the thing is like it's a community of different writers. It's like relying on other people to help you figure things out. That was my experience with a lot of the self-publishing. And then I just got it out there, and and it is what it is. I just like a couple of months ago released and I worked with a woman, Avon Shore, to do the audiobook, which I think she did a wonderful job. I think it came out pretty well. So yeah. And now it's just got to go on Netflix somehow. Like someone out there, like, make the connection. It's got to be a movie or Netflix or something.
I hear you. Brett Frischmann. Hey, Netflix, if you're listening, Shepherd's Drone, okay? He said it right here. That was Brett Frischmann, Charles Widger Endowed University, professor in law, business, economics at Villanova University, and the author, of course, of Shepherd's Drone. In fact, if somebody wants to pick up your book, Brett, maybe they want a copy, or maybe they want to, try to read it or listen to it on Audible or whatever, how can they do that?
Well, there's the Shepherd's Drone. I have a website, so you can just look up Shepherd's Drone. You can follow me on Twitter, and there's links to it from there. I have a faculty website at Villanova, and then it's on Audible. And in fact, there's some free promo codes out there somewhere. So if you you can find the free promo codes, you can get it for free.
There you go. Thanks again for joining us, Brett. And if you guys want to find more of my interviews, you can do that right here, or go to tonyahall.net. Thanks for joining.